The practically what is the clutch and what is the working principle is there. So now this is the engine. Actually the main position of the engine cylinder is this one actually. So for the showing better purpose we are now it is a horizontal position. So here is the engine, total engine is like this. Okay, zoom it. So after the engine, here is the total clutch mounting is here. Now we are removing the clutch mounting, and here is the total clutch set is there. So here is the flywheel, then inside this is the clutch plate, and this one is the pressure plate, then this one is the diaphragm spring. Now I will one by one I will show you the different parts. So upper one, this one is the diaphragm spring, and now I am removing this one. See, so outside this one is the diaphragm spring, and this one is the pressure plate, and then here is the clutch plate. Now you have seen this one, and then this one is the flywheel. Now we are going to discuss about the single plate clutch. So in single plate clutch there is three parts is there. First one is the flywheel, and second one is the clutch plate, and third one is the pressure plate. Another part is that diaphragm spring. So now here you have seen this one is the flywheel. So it this one, so this one. Okay. So next we will going to discuss about the next part is that clutch plate. So this one is the gearbox, and another part, this one is the known as the clutch plate. This one is the clutch plate, and another thing is that here is the pressure plate. Here is the this one is the pressure plate, and backside this one is the diaphragm spring. So as per the discussion on the theory part, we have discussed when you are applying the clutch pedal and the diaphragm spring is compressed, at that time the pressure plate is compressed towards the outside, means towards the diaphragm spring. At that time the what happened, this clutch plate which is connected at the input of the gearbox, the spline part, input of the gearbox, this one, as you see this is rotating. So it is free, when it is free, this is directly connected to the flywheel. It means when the flywheel will rotate and the pressure plate, at that time the pressure plate and the diaphragm will be rotate, but this one is the free. How it is possible? Due to the thrust bearing. So thrust bearing, I will show you the thrust bearing. Thrust bearing is here. This one is the thrust bearing, where we are applying, this is the rod which is connected to the clutch pedal, and it is connected to the clutch pedal. When you are applying the clutch, at that time the diaphragm spring pushes this, the thrust bearing will pushes the diaphragm spring, and that diaphragm spring will contract this pressure plate, and this one will be free, clutch plate. So that is, here you have seen this one. So the spline part is there inside, the internal threads are inside the clutch plate. So at that time, and the external threads at the spline part of the input of the gearbox, and it is directly connected to the gearbox of the input shaft of the gearbox, and this is pressure plate is directly connected to the flywheel, so that the clutch is possible. Again I will show you. Here is the flywheel, then clutch plate, then this is the pressure plate and the diaphragm spring. When we will pushes this diaphragm spring, the pressure plate will up or the towards the diaphragm outside. So at that time the clutch plate will be free. Free means that is connected to the gearbox, and gearbox easily free, and we can apply the first gear, second gear and third gear easily. So this is the main function of the single plate clutch, the main function of the thrust bearing. So when here is the lever of the clutch, so when it is applied, so now this is disassembled, so that when it will apply, the clutch plate will be contract towards the diaphragm spring or outside. Now I will show you. So by removing this clutch plate, here is the pressure plate and here is the diaphragm spring. Okay. So this one is the thrust bearing. So when we are apply the clutch, so how it is work, see this one. Okay. So it will press to the diaphragm spring. When it will press, the pressure plate will move this towards outside. So when it will move, then it will distract, means it is disengaged from the clutch plate, and clutch plate will be connected to the gearbox input shaft, and it will be free at the time of the rotation of the flywheel and the pressure plate and diaphragm spring. Okay. So this is when it is free, will easily shifting the gear. Now we are going to discuss about the single plate clutch. Single plate clutch are generally used in heavy vehicles and the cars. So in the case of the single plate clutch, we are having the 4 parts. First one is the flywheel, second one is the clutch plate, third one is the pressure plate, and another main part is the diaphragm spring. So let's see how it is work. So now here is the engine, clutch and the gearbox, and engine is connected to the flywheel output shaft, and here is the clutch total setup, and here this spring bearing is known as the thrust bearing. Now we are applying the thrust bearing. At that time we will change the gear easily. So let's see how the clutch is work and how all the parts are engaging. Let's see, this is known as the flywheel. This part is known as the flywheel, which is connected to the crankshaft. Now then another part after this flywheel, here is another part is known as the clutch plate. So this is known as the clutch plate, and clutch plate having the friction material mounting, which is engaging, and main role is that to engage and disengage the crankshaft and the input of the gearbox. Okay. So here is the spline shaft, which is input of the gearbox and directly connected to the clutch plate. So now we'll start how the clutch plate is work, then we'll discuss about the pressure plate and the diaphragm spring. So now here the clutch plate is connected, now engaged with the flywheel, and we will apply the axial thrust. We will apply the axial thrust on the clutch plate. At that time what will happen? It will rotate with the flywheel. It will rotate with the flywheel due to the friction. Due to the friction, it will rotate. Okay, at the same speed. It will rotate at the same speed. Now, because we are applying the axial pressure, and when it will rotate and it is engaged by this shaft, main shaft of the input of the gearbox. So outer part, now outer part is the known as the pressure plate. So when pressure plate also engaged, so what will happen actually? Let's see what will happen in the case of the pressure plate. So now this one is known as the pressure plate, and this one is the clutch cover. One clip is used here, strip, and which is used to move the pressure plate towards and outwards, and this is known as the diaphragm spring. The outer part is known as the diaphragm spring, and the main role of the diaphragm spring is that this is known as the diaphragm spring, and another, this is a hole, and here the outside this is a thrust bearing. So thrust bearing, here is outside that thrust bearing is there. So thrust bearing will pushes the diaphragm spring to move inward, and the outer circumference will move outward. So inward is moving, means the hole is moving inward, and the outer is moving outwards. So when you are applying the axial force to this hole, so it will moving outward like this. You have seen this one. So when it will move outward, so this part is clipped with the pressure plate. So this part is clipped with the pressure plate, and that time the pressure plate, so the diaphragm spring will riveted, and that diaphragm spring will connected with the cover, clutch cover, and clutch cover is connected to the flywheel, and before the before the diaphragm spring, the pressure plate is connected by the clip. So when it is pushes inward, the pressure plate will move outward. So at that time, now let's see how to work actually. This is the diaphragm spring, this is the clutch cover, and here is the pressure plate. So it is bolted with the flywheel. So flywheel will rotate, the clutch cover will also rotate. Yes or no? So when the flywheel will rotate, the clutch cover is rotate, and all are now engaged. All are rotating. The output shaft of this one is also rotating. When we are applying the force on this diaphragm spring, when we are applying the force at the diaphragm spring, what will happen? The pressure plate moving outward. When we are applying the force on the diaphragm spring, the pressure plate will move outward. Let's see how it will work actually. Here is the flywheel, clutch plate, pressure plate, and the diaphragm spring, and this one, this shaft is connected to the clutch plate. Now all are rotating together. When you are applying the clutch, so at that time the thrust bearing will move inwards and the pressure plate will move outward. Let's see, like this. When you move, this is outside, moving outside, so it is free. When you release that one, then it will free. When you are applying, it will free. This one is not rotating, both are rotating, but inside the clutch plate is not rotating. That's why the gearbox is free at that time. When you are releasing, all are engaged. Now all are rotating. Flywheel rotating, clutch rotating, and the pressure plate rotating. Okay. So when you are applying the force, at that time the thrust bearing will move the diaphragm inside, and the pressure plate will move outside, and the frictional clutch plate is free. At that time we can change the gear. When you release the pedal, all are connected together, then all are rotating. So this is the concept. This is the concept of total of the our clutch, single plate clutch.